Hi, and welcome to this week's From the Vault episode from the Magdalen House podcast. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Dallas, Texas, and known affectionately by many as Maggies. Every first and third Wednesday, we share an episode from one of our 3 podcast series. In our From the Vault episodes, we share past podcast releases from our 3 different podcast series: Recover Ed, Recovered, Interviews with Alcoholics, and Hope for the Family. Our podcasts aim to connect, inspire, and educate alcoholics, loved ones, and the community to the Magdalen House and the services we offer. We are so glad you're here. Thanks for listening.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We are having Chloe on to talk to us all about fear and fear inventory. I know that you are going to love it so much. She always has so much wonderful insight and experience to share. So down to earth. I could just go on and on and on. And if you love what you hear, you can hear her past talks on the Magdalen House podcast. She has done everything from resentment to step 10, step 6 and 7, 8 and 9. And you can find that on the Magdalen House podcast if you look for studying the steps. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chloe. Hi, Chloe.
Hey, Stephanie. Thank you. And I just want to, clarify that when Stephanie says I'm down to earth, what she means is I'm extremely flawed and I have no filter. So I lead with that. So I have a lot of experience with being run by fear and a lot of experience doing fear inventory because of that. And a lot of experience causing harm when I'm being run by fear. So I will for sure be talking about all of that. But first, I am an alcoholic. My name is Chloe. My sobriety date is July 7th, 1992. I have a home group and I have a sponsor. She has a sponsor and I am a sponsor. And all of those things I just have found to be extremely vital and important to sustaining recovery. And full disclosure, I forgot about this podcast just for a minute. Like I remembered, but I, was all caught up in self this morning. I was in a resentment and, doing what I do when I'm in a resentment, which is the grouch and the brainstorm, which is thinking about how wrong he was and how it's not fair and poor me. And what, just from repetition and sponsorship, what I know to do is put pen to paper. And I started writing this little 4-column inventory out, and it turned into this giant, fear column, or fear, section in that inventory. And I, took that into a fear inventory. And partway through that, I thought, hey, I'm getting on Next Step this morning and talking about fear inventory. How perfect is this? So I'm pretty sure God made me extremely flawed, really, and so slow to learn and tragically human, just so that I could be here with you guys this morning. So thank you. I love fear inventory. I think, I just find it to be a really quick, easy, and very effective tool. But it blew my mind. Like the first time doing it, it was, I think, one of the really pivotal, eye-opening, exercises that I did in these steps where I saw I had just a profound shift in my outlook. And I'll talk more about that. But really what happened for me in fear inventory is I went from victim to perpetrator, really. And, the freedom in that is like victims don't get well. Right? As long as I'm a victim and you're doing stuff to me, I have no power over that. I have no control. But if I'm the one that's driving that bus, then I can change that. And that was just so freeing for me. So I do want to back up a little bit because the first 3 steps and that resentment inventory are really important to have, experience with before I get to this fear inventory. And, step 1 obviously is always that I always have to bring it back to that, because if I am not surrendered in step 1, if I am not continuously in that place of being surrendered to my powerlessness, being completely aware that I am facing a fatal and progressive illness, then I'm not going to have the willingness and the desperation that I need to really look fearlessly, because, what we're doing in all of these steps, it requires a level of willingness that really I have only found to come from desperation. And so coming from that hopeless and desperate place that we find in step one is the catalyst to get me through these steps, because I'm not going to do it just to be a better person. I'm way too selfish. It's like that has not proven to be a winning formula for me. The only reason I do it is because I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to drink. I don't want to die. Maybe even in that order. Like I'm way more afraid of being in emotional pain than I am of dying. And I'll talk more about that too, because that was one of the big truths I saw in that first fear inventory, was just this like profound fear of suffering, fear of like emotional suffering. So, that first step, desperation, I still have to go there today. I need to always be in that surrendered place. Step two, believing that there's something bigger out there that can make me recover, that can make me well, that can bring me relief. And, that step three decision to seek that out. But step three, those pages in 60 to 63 are so important when going into this fact-finding and fact-facing process in our fourth step, because I had to have like a real experience in that third step of understanding how my selfishness and self-centeredness manifested. I had to see how I was running the show, how my self-will was driving all of these things that I was doing. Because, really, I just thought that I was kind of this like, I don't know, this raft on the ocean being bounced around, going where the tide drove me. And the truth is I was driven. I was driven by, all of, these fears, these resentments, these defects of character. And I just didn't know it. I thought that I was responding to life. In reality, I was, responding from a place of fear and this distorted perception of life. These steps are designed to awaken us spiritually. We are spiritually asleep. And so, I've heard this guy, Mark, talks about how like when you're asleep, you're asleep. You don't know that you're asleep. You have no concept of being asleep until you wake up. Once you're awake, you can look back and say, oh, I was sleeping. It's the same thing with our spirit. When we are asleep spiritually, we don't know that we are asleep. We are just operating through life, reacting. We think we're making decisions, but we're generally, if you're anything like me, I am driven by fear. And so I'm making decisions based on a lie. And I don't know that I'm doing it until I am awake. And I look back and I can see where all of that fear has taken me. And that's really, the biggest thing with fear is that it's not just like, oh, I'm afraid of snakes, that's so scary. It's that like, I won't move to a state, and I don't have a fear of snakes, but just a totally benign example would be, I'm afraid of snakes. And so I will only live in an apartment building. I won't buy a house because there could be a snake. I won't move to a state that is known for having a lot of snakes. I end up building my life around these fears, and I'm asleep spiritually. So I don't even know that I'm doing it. It's just where I feel comfortable. And as my spiritual sickness gets bigger and bigger, my ability to do things gets smaller and smaller because these fears rule my life and I don't even know it. So that's kind of the theme of this, really, is not just that I'm afraid, but that I set off these chains of circumstances. I affect people, I destroy relationships, I take jobs, I leave jobs, I fall in love, I leave that person, I won't let my kids do things, I yell at my kids, I do these things from this core place of fear, and I don't even know that's what drives me. And so this fear inventory, again, we have to start in that third step where I really recognize that I am run on self-will, that I'm coming from this place of relying on myself, of trying to arrange everything to keep me comfortable. I am completely selfish, so I want to be comfortable all the time, and I want you to make my comfort your first priority. So then I get mad at you when you don't. And so I'm doing all of these things to just try to keep myself comfortable. And it affects the people around me. They get mad, they retaliate, they step on my toes, and that now I have a resentment and it's your fault. So that fourth step, that resentment inventory, it comes right after that third step, where I am saying, I am convinced that my life run on my will can hardly be a success. That's what we're saying in step 3. I'm convinced of it. I have now seen that when I'm running my life, it sucks. Everybody's mad at me. I'm mad at everybody. I have conflict all the time. And so I'm making that decision in step 3 to surrender my will and to do what I can to take these steps so that I am able to do God's will, right? Line my will with God's will. And so that's what we're going into step 4 with. And it's an important place to be going into the resentment inventory, because that's where we start looking at, that fourth column where, fear is first introduced. We're first looking at how these things are affected, and then what do I do? So I think I have a resentment this morning. Let's talk about this morning. Let's talk about this in real time. I was married for 25 years. I got divorced. I started dating for the first time, like in my adult life. And, now I have this boyfriend. He moves into my house, and, 99% of the time things are great. But then, he's also tragically human. And, frustratingly, as much as I try to convince him otherwise, he doesn't put my happiness at the very top of his list all of the time. And sometimes he also cannot read my mind, which is also really annoying. And so I have this way of like changing what I need from minute to minute and not telling him. And then I want him to guess and just know and to adapt to that and stop everything he's doing to fix how I'm feeling. And so I'm this flawed, insecure person who lacks security, and I want it from him. So there's a lot of flaws there. We can pick all of that apart. But the bottom line is, he does not meet all of my needs. The plot twist there is that only God can, but, I won't stop trying. I, have this slow learner that just keeps wanting to make other people responsible for my happiness. And when that happens, I end up with a resentment, right? Something is affected in me. Usually it's my security. I've learned that through doing enough 4-column inventory. When my security gets threatened, I get a resentment. So I was resentful at him for doing something saying something inconsiderate, which I didn't tell him in the moment that I was upset about. Usually the other fun fact with resentments is that, they're fancied or real. So almost all of my resentments are of the fancied type. It's a story that I make up in my head, but it doesn't matter. It'll kill me just the same. So I have this resentment. It's really, there's this giant fear underneath. I mean, it's many different parts, but the real core of it is that I'm not important. It comes from this place of like, I'm not important. And so when I have that fear, I start looking for evidence of it everywhere. And again, in that resentment inventory, I can see, we've looked at our self-seeking. What do I do when I'm resentful, and fearful? Is I start building a case. I start manipulating. I am super passive aggressive. I make these little comments, drop these little bombs, trying to manipulate him into responding a certain way, i.e. changing and treating me right. I start looking for evidence, building a case. I'm judge and jury and executioner. I do all of these things to try to fix how I feel. And he's not the problem and he's not the solution. And so I am delusional all the way around. Again, I fall asleep spiritually. I don't even know that I'm doing it, and I've been sober a while, so the best we can hope for really is not getting perfect, but it's at getting faster at turning towards the solution. That's it. We don't get, I've gotten better. Don't get me wrong. Like I cause a lot less harm, but I am still very driven by selfishness and self-centeredness. And when I cause harm. And so this morning, again, I was in this place. I felt just uncomfortable in my body. I was trying to start a fight. That's a good indicator for me that something's wrong, is when I'm looking for things to start a fight about. And he went for a run and I took out my notebook and started writing, and here we are. And when he came back in, I made an amends to him for, the way that I was showing up. And I didn't have to go into all of it, but, I made amends for the harm that I was causing. And really, this is step 10, right? Like we do step 4, we look at all of these things, but then this ongoing process of watching, right? And looking at it and giving it to God and sharing it and cleaning up the wreckage, that's step 10. And so we're learning this so completely in step 4 so that we can use it for the rest of our lives. Because again, I have not found the formula to become unhuman. Maybe tomorrow, and I'll be here to share with you how to get perfect. But today I'm just really telling you about how to recognize your fears and not destroy your relationships in the process. So that's like real time how this works in my life. And we will take it to the book because there's just some really great things on fear in the book, but I do want to say, like, our resentment inventory has a pretty decent format. It's pretty good at showing us, what Bill wanted us to do for resentment. Fear is, there's no little chart in there. And so there are as many different ways to format it as there are sponsors. And so if your sponsor has told you to do it a different way than I'm going to talk about, do what she's saying. I've had a lot of different sponsors and each one has had me format it differently. They've all been really helpful. This is really the only point of these inventories is to see where self-reliance takes me, right? When I'm operating from that place of fear and I'm reacting to it on my own reliance versus what God-reliance would look like, right? And and however you format it to get there, that's the important part. I mean, is getting there is the important part. The format's less important. So if I'm saying that I did it a different way, don't go back to your sponsor and tell her that she's doing it wrong. Chloe said that you're supposed to do it this other way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you my own experience with it, and how I do it today. Again, I've done it a lot of different ways, but really the point is just to be awakened spiritually so that we're not driven by these things. So let's turn to page 67 in the big book. And this is coming right after we've written our resentment inventory. So it's the paragraph right after our 4th column where we've just spent, all of these pages writing about, where we've been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid, frightened, right? So we've just been looking at this. We see how this shows up in our life. And now we're just pulling the fear piece out and looking at it more closely. Because again, if we just felt afraid and that was it, no big deal, but we feel afraid and we burn our life to the ground to not feel that way, because I live by this delusion that if I change out here, then I'll feel better. Okay, so the very last paragraph on 67, it says, notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. And that's referring back to that 4th step on 65, the 3 columns that they have there. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. And again, that's what I'm saying. It's not just in the fear area, it bleeds into everything. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. And I love that visual. Like if you can think of like a black piece of cloth, and if one thread of white got added to that machine, you're going to look at that piece of black cloth and you're going to see that white thread all the way through it, right? That's what fear looks like. It shows up everywhere. It affects everything, and some examples of that for me has been, it's like, and this isn't current, but, I make a mistake at work. I accidentally reply all to an email that I meant to just reply to one person. And I am so embarrassed. And then my security is threatened, right? My pocketbook is threatened. I'm sure that I'm going to lose my job. Now my boss sees what an idiot I am. I knew that I wasn't smart enough. Now they're all going to know. And I go to work that next day and I see some women chatting in the corner. And I feel terrified. I don't recognize necessarily that I feel afraid. I think they're jerks. I think they're talking about me. Everybody knows, my boss has told, the whole office knows, they're all out to get me, and now I'm going to start causing drama to get back at them, to try to convince people that I am smart, that I am good at my job, and I'm going to make them look bad so that I can maintain my position there. This is based in fear. That's not based in reality. Most likely, none of that is true, but when I'm operating from a place of fear, the fabric of my existence is shot through with it. It goes everywhere. And then I go home and I kick the dog and yell at the kid, and, because I am, driving this bus out of control. So it set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, but did not we ourselves set the ball rolling. Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. And now if we go back to that, work analogy, my boss then calls me into her office to talk about, the drama that I'm causing with my coworkers, and they've come to her, and, now she's reprimanding me. I get a write-up and I feel like it's not fair. I didn't deserve this. I haven't done anything. And I cannot see how, this little fear that I had over here when I made a mistake set in train all of these, this series of events. And I feel like the victim. I feel like it's happening to me. Again, we are asleep spiritually. We don't recognize this in the moment. We are reacting over and over again to things that are just underlying, that we cannot see. So top of 68, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. And so it's telling me clear instruction there, we're putting them on paper. So, again, we could have a fear of bridges, put it on there. If it just is isolated, it's probably not going to go very far. But if I plan my, driving route every day around this fear of bridges, it's ruling my life. Most likely I'm late to work, or I'm forcing people to, bend to my will because of this fear. Again, that's what we're looking at here. We asked ourselves why we have them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? So what I do is I take a fear. So, let's say that this fear of, a fear of being alone. It's like that's, again, I got divorced at, 46 years old. I have 2 kids, I have a mortgage, I have a car payment. I've never been a single adult woman, so it's like I, come into this new life of mine with this fear of being alone. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it looks like to be alone. And so, how does that show up? It shows up in all of these different ways. It doesn't show up in one area. One thing that I can do is I can be super nice. I can be so sweet. I can, be overly helpful, really attentive, so considerate. It looks great. That doesn't look like I'm causing any harm. The truth is it's a manipulation. It is this self-centered fear. Like I am being self-seeking, trying to manipulate the people in my life to not leave me. It's inauthentic. It's a lie. I am just trying to force you to stay in my life. It's based on this fear of being alone, and I don't see it. That's why these inventories are so important, because we start looking at what moves us, what makes us operate, what we're made of. I think I'm this great person. I may say I'm a people pleaser, I'm a little bit codependent. No, I am a user. I need you in my life so that I'm okay. I don't care if you want to be in my life. I'll pretend to be somebody that I'm not, to force you to stay here. That is dishonest. That is selfish. So I'm looking at these things and I don't know what's real from false. And, we're just putting pen to paper. Okay, back to the book. So we asked ourselves why we have them. So that one, fear of being alone. I have this fear because, I've never been alone before. I have this fear because self-reliance has failed me. I tried to be a good wife. I tried to do the right things, and still I ended up alone. I turned myself inside out. Whatever, fill in the blank. I did all of the things that on human power I could do, and it failed me, right? It failed me. I ended up alone. And now what? What are the things that I do in that place? So then it tells me self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. And, a lot of that was true. I maintained, a happy marriage for a lot of years, seemingly on self-reliance. At the end of the day, I could say, I showed up pretty well most of the time. But when it failed, I lost my self-confidence. I know all of my tools were gone. I didn't know what else to do.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Please, absolutely.
Can you explain the line, when it made us cocky, it was worse, and like what that means?
Well, to me, that means like when I think that I'm doing such a great job, when I am so convinced that I see it a lot with people who are really smart, especially that they've been able to rely on their own intelligence or their own manipulation, really, when they have gotten what they've wanted throughout life because they are overachievers, because they're smart, because they're manipulative, whatever it is, when it works, we get this cockiness. And I mean, for me, it's worse because I'm slower to surrender it. I'm slower to give up that way of acting because it's worked for so long. I've gotten my needs met. It's the only way I know how to show up. And it usually, if something doesn't work, I'm going to abandon it pretty quickly and find something else. It's kind of like in the third step where we talk about, our actor may be kind, considerate, modest, self-sacrificing. If that works 99% of the time, I'm going to keep going to that. If that doesn't work, I'm going to go to I'm going to be a bully. I'm going to get my needs met in some other way. So I get cocky when something is effective, and it makes it harder for me to surrender my will around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree? Do you have a better answer?
No, I was wondering for myself. So thank you.
Sure. Does anybody else have a question? I will totally just talk for an hour. So please jump in and ask anything that you guys may want to. Okay, let's keep reading then. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so. That's one of my favorite sentences in the big book, really, is I think that sentence can be used for pretty much my whole life. Well, Chloe, perhaps there is a better way. For we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We started that process in step 3 when we surrendered our will, when we made that decision to turn our will and our life over. We are on this different basis, yet we don't really have the power to do a whole lot different. We're still in the process of gaining that access to that power. But we're getting there. That's what all of this is about. We're on this new basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust God, infinite God, rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. That goes back to, He didn't assign me as the director. He assigned me as one of the agents. He assigned me as one of the actors. I am an actor in a play. That's the role that He assigned. And this is I would call this the fear promise. I love this next sentence. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. And that is a beautiful promise. It does not matter what's going on around me. If I rely on Him and do what I think that He would have me do, my serenity matches whatever calamity is around there. I can be unaffected by it. I don't have to be ruled by fear anymore. I can meet it with serenity. And that's a beautiful promise, especially for somebody who's been so reactionary like me my whole life. I've just, been so passive. I've just reacted to everything. So this is a beautiful promise. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. So I want to talk about that for a second, because I think that that's been, going back to that divorce, that's been one of the areas that God has been able to demonstrate through me what He can do the most. I really wanted to just have like this perfect life, this easy life where I was a good girl. And so God made sure that only good things came my way, that I didn't, have anything hard or scary or uncomfortable ever happen again. And what I've seen is by doing that, I end up relying on myself. That becomes self-reliance. I try to keep my life small and safe and comfortable. But the real demonstration of what God has done in my life has been in those hard times, in those challenges, when things are really scary, when I trust and rely on God, he enables me to match calamity with serenity. When I trust and rely on God, even if it looks like everything is burning around me, I can still walk through with my head up. I can still maintain this connection. I can keep seeking. I can keep showing up for the commitments that I've made. I can keep showing up for my family. I can still be kind and loving. I can still, have my sponsees over and do step work. I can still be a, functioning employee at work and contributing to my job. I can still be the person that God intends me to be, even if things don't look like I think they're supposed to, because I have this faith that God is behind all of it. If I have that God reliance, then it's not a mistake. It's not that these things are happening to me. It's that these things are happening for me, that something great is going to come out of this. And so, people will say like that, you can't have fear and faith at the same time. That if you have faith, then there is no fear. And that has not been my experience at all. I have had so much fear, and I've also had faith that it's going to be okay. This guy that I won't say his name because it's an outside issue, he says that the opposite of faith is not fear, but the opposite of faith is control. And that has proven to be so true for me, that when I am in fear, when I'm being ruled by fear and I don't have faith, I am trying to control everything. And that's where where I'm being driven by these fears, and I'm letting them take me down this road that is causing harm. I am trying to control the outcome because I don't trust that God's got a bigger plan in this. When I am in a place of faith, I can still be afraid because I don't know what it's going to look like. I just don't know. It's that fear of the unknown, but I can still have faith that it's going to be okay. And I've had experience over experience with that, where just, it's that whole like jump afraid. You're jumping, you're terrified, but you're still jumping. You're still going to have that fear. I heard somebody say once, like, of course you're insecure. Life is insecure. There is no security in life. You could step out of your front door and get hit by a bus. You could stay in and choke on a ham sandwich. There is nothing secure about life. And what I do in the face of that is either say, you know what, there's nothing secure in life, God. I'm putting myself in your hands. I'm relying on you because, I can't keep myself safe. And so I'm going to rely on you and just trust that whatever happens is supposed to happen. Or I can get all self-reliant and try to, cut my little ham sandwich up into tiny bites or put it in a blender. So I'm drinking it. I'm not leaving the house. I'm, doing all of these things to try to keep myself safe. And then I slip in the shower and die anyway. So, I think that we are faced over and over again with our own finite selves. And, if it gets painful enough, I will finally surrender to God having a bigger plan when I'm convinced that my way doesn't work,
Chloe, can I share something?
Absolutely.
So I was just thinking about this whenever you were talking, when I first started working at the Magdalen House, and I was separating from my fiance, and I had to find a new place to live and all these other things. And so it was a lot of fear. I remember I came into the work and I was crying because I didn't know where I was going to live. And I said, I know God's not going to leave me homeless, but I was still so afraid because I didn't know what was happening, but I still had faith that that God wasn't going to leave me homeless. And so it was like such a demonstration of having both at the same time. And I remember that was the first time you ever told me that the opposite of fear is control. And now look at the life. It's wonderful. So
it is. And I think, it's like at first we just have to trust other people. And then once we have experience after experience of seeing it's okay, it's a little easier to step into. That doesn't mean we're fearless, but it just, we're like, okay, all of these other times God hasn't dumped me. He probably won't dump me this time too. But, it's like that holding our breath. And I remember I have all this hesitation because I think, what if the ex-husband listens to this? But I remember he was still in the house with me. And I was on this place, in this place of like, do I end this or do I stay? Do I end this or do I try to make it work? And I was like really throwing, like the only thing I know to do when I'm in that kind of fear and that kind of unknowing, that, that indecision, is to just deepen my relationship with God. That's the only thing I could do, and the only way I know to deepen my relationship with God is make sure I'm not harboring any resentments, make sure that I'm helping others, make sure that I'm spending time in, my prayer and meditation, and just doing those things over and over again. Right. And so, I wasn't hearing an answer, for months. I wasn't hearing an answer. God, what am I supposed, like, this guy's in my house. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I need you to tell me, is he supposed to stay or is he supposed to go? And what I just kept hearing was, wait, it's not time yet. It's not time yet. And I didn't like that answer. I wanted to take I wanted to know, and I wasn't knowing. And then one day I knew, and there was no question. And I think, in hindsight, and maybe I even knew it a little bit at the time, if I had made a decision any earlier, I think it would have been reactionary. I think it would have been a decision based in fear or resentment. And I would have questioned it later. I would have wondered if it was the right decision because it wasn't for the right reasons. When I knew I had done inventory on him, I had been praying, I made amends to him for my mistakes and the harms that I caused. I was, pretty free from, any resentment around that. And I knew it was the right thing. I knew that it was God telling me and it wasn't me telling me. And so, it's like, those are the things that build faith, is that when I'm not making a decision based on fear and God shows up and it's the right decision, I am so clear that it was the right decision. My life is amazing. And I hear feedback. I just got, some yesterday from a friend, somebody I've known since I was 18 years old. We were in treatment together and he told somebody else that I'm the happiest he's ever seen me. That's like amazing feedback. And, and he didn't even give it to me. And those are like the little confirmations that, like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. I am the happiest I've ever been. And it's really only because of trusting and relying on God, not myself. I'll make decisions based on money or, you telling me that I'm pretty or, things being easy or fun. I like to make decisions based on what's fun, what's not boring. And those are self-reliant decisions. When I'm making decisions based on God, they produce a really different outcome. Okay. So, but I just want to read these last two sentences in that paragraph on 68. Well, the one we read before was, instead we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him, so this is the fear prayer. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be, not what he would have us do. I want that one. God, I want a plan. I want action. I want actionable items. I want to know what am I supposed to do next? I'm directing my attention to what he would have me be. And so that's what I'm looking at also in this inventory is, with God-reliance, who am I? Like, I'm kind, I'm loving, I'm trusting, I'm patient, I'm honest, I'm dependable, I'm reliable, I'm considerate. This is who God would have me be, and then when I show up that way, everything else works. It might not look like I think that it's going to, but it works. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. And that's another promise there. At once we commence to outgrow fear. It doesn't mean that at once we have no fear anymore. It means we start to outgrow this fear. I found a lot of times that my fear is reduced just to the extent that I can take that hard action that I need to have, those uncomfortable conversations with people. Like, that's one of my biggest ones. I don't like being uncomfortable, and so confrontation or anything that I think is going to make you not like me, I don't want to do it. I can ask God to remove that, to direct, my attention to what he would have me be, which would be brave and trusting and direct and honest. And then, it works out okay. It doesn't always work out like I think that it's supposed to, but it always works out okay. That's who God would have me be. That's what God-reliance looks like. Self-reliance looks like manipulation, talking about you behind your back, rallying the troops, trying to bully you into doing what I want you to do, and that gets me the same horrible, outcome every time. So that's the end of the what the book talks about with fear inventory. It's going to then go into sex inventory after, which probably is by design, honestly. I think that, I heard this once and I just love it. Like, if you think of like a herd of antelopes, right? Like in the Serengeti and the, plains or whatever they are, they operate as this herd. And there's like this very quiet, imperceivable communication that happens between the antelopes or the zebras or the horses, any of those herd animals. And there's the ones that are like the leaders, like the alphas, and they're the ones that are in charge of keeping an eye out for the dangers, right? And so I think of that as being how I react to fear. I've got these little things that are like always looking for what's going to be scary, what's going to be uncomfortable, what's going to, trigger one of those fears that I am run on. Let's say the fear of being alone. Something dumb will happen, like the boyfriend will pick up his phone to respond to a text when I'm talking to him, right? Innocuous, just this little thing. It triggers this antelope in my brain that goes, emergency, emergency. You're going to be alone. He doesn't care. He, likes somebody else better. You're boring. And the whole herd of antelopes reacts to this imaginary predator in the bushes and goes charging this way. And then I'm trampling over things and, and there wasn't even anything here. Or if I stopped and said, hey, can you put your phone down? Like something just as basic, what would God have me be? Sometimes it's not so dang sensitive, sometimes it's just pausing, asking God to remove that fear. Sometimes it's saying, hey, it hurts my feelings when you get on your phone when I'm talking to you. There's a whole bunch of like really, healthy, spiritually recovered ways of reacting to those situations when I'm awake, and that's the thing. I have to stay in 10, 11, and 12 so that I am awake. When I go back to sleep, that's when that dumb reactionary herd of antelopes goes charging in the other way, causing all of this damage that I think I'm a victim about. I don't even see that I caused that. You guys have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have two, unless you have other things that you want to say, but can you give us like an example of like a specific fear inventory so like the ladies can hear it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say the one from this morning, it would have been, it was like a fear of the boyfriend not liking me or not being interested or like a fear of him being disinterested. And so, from there I would, so I put it on the paper, I put it on paper, I put it at the top of the paper, so if we go to this paragraph, we reviewed our fears thoroughly, we put them on paper, even though we had no resentment and connection with them. So I'm putting it on paper. Fear that he doesn't like me anymore. Why do I have that fear? Because he picked up his phone while we were in the middle of talking. I'll just stay with that. I mean, really, I could probably go on for 1,000 years about why I have that fear. I can find evidence everywhere. It really doesn't matter, because the real reason that I have that fear is because self-reliance fails me, right? So then I write out, how has self-reliance failed me? Which basically means, what do I do when I am relying on self? And so this was, I take jabs, I manipulate, I am passive aggressive, I pull away, I create distance, I punish. These are the things that I do when I'm relying on self. I look for evidence. I don't do this anymore, but it would have been looking for attention from other men, plotting my next move, well, this one's obviously done, so who am I going to hook up with next? or it may be seeking revenge. Again, I don't do this one anymore either, but it might be flirting with his friends or letting him know that some guy, hit me up on Facebook, or, these are, this is what self-reliance. And, again, when I'm doing those things, I usually don't even realize it. And then I would say, so wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went. And then I would ask, what does God-reliance look like? What would God have me be? And so what God-reliance would look like, who God would have me be, is, trusting, honest, direct, compassionate, a seeker, basically all of the things that, that I want from my partner, is somebody who would talk to me about these situations in the moment, somebody who is kind and loving, somebody who is honest. That's who God would have me be. And that's what God-reliance looks like. And then, then at the bottom, those are the things that I write out. At the bottom, I write, God, please remove this fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. And so that's how I format it. Again, like I said, I've done it a bunch of different ways, but that's the one that I've done for a long time now. I really like it. For me, it's pretty quick, but it really gets me to the truth so fast. And, for me, everything I do is about effect. I want the least amount of work with the most outcome. And this one, it's so clear, it shows me how I'm harming people. And then it shows me, what I'm supposed to grow into, who God would want me to be in this world,
Thank you. I like that.
Did you have another question?
Oh, yes. If you don't have anything else to say, I was wondering if you could tell the story about your mom.
I can tell the story about my mom. Also, have I told the story that Chinese village story on the podcast before? Because that's just my favorite, and it works with everything.
I know you've told it. I don't know if it's on the podcast, though.
Okay, well, I'm telling it
whatever you want to do.
Okay, well, I'll tell it again too, just because it's like the most applicable thing in my life ever. So my mom, she and I have, that sort of typical complicated mother-daughter relationship. I love her. I've, done a lot of, inventory around my relationship with her. And back when I lived in Maine, my husband at the time got a job here in Texas. My mom lives in Maine. And I was so afraid of telling her that I was moving to Texas, because I knew that she was going to freak out. And she is one of those people that when she freaks out, I was going to have to hear about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I was going to have to process it with her and talk her off the ledge. I knew it was going to be so uncomfortable. And I hate that stuff. I hate conflict. I just want everybody to love me and think I'm the best always. And, and I will do whatever. I'll lie to you to make that happen. And so, instead of just, being honest and direct and telling her this is what's happening, well, I did do that. And when she started to spin out, instead of just, sitting with her and, being, what God would have me be and what God would have me do, which would be to, receive that and love her. And instead I said, it's okay, Mom, we'll buy a house with a room for you. You can move there with us. So my mom, at the time and still today, is an active drug user and overuser maybe. And, I didn't consult with anybody else in my family about this. And when I did mention it to my then husband, he freaked out. And I said, it's okay. You know that she's not going to really move with us. She can't even show up for Thanksgiving. There's no way she's coming. It'll be fine. And then as it gets closer, I make the decision that we do need to buy a house with an extra room just, for visits. If she comes to visit, that would be the right thing. And again, I am spiritually, I have no clue. I swear to you guys, I was completely delusional. I thought that this was real. I was not right. I was not heavy in my step work at that time. I was I had slacked off and I didn't drink, but it's a good example of us going to sleep and before drinking, we cause a whole lot of wreckage. Sometimes we drink right away. Sometimes we just burn stuff to the ground in this slow burn before we end up drinking. So long story short, she does move with us to Texas, and she brings her little drug addiction with her. As you guys, if you've been around, drunk people or high people, or if you've ever been one of those people, all sorts of exciting things happen, like falling downstairs or spilling things everywhere or ruining, Thanksgiving stuffing, or, just all of the little things. And my kids had two recovered parents their whole life, and they started having nightmares that their grandmother was going to burn the house down, and it started affecting their mental health and how they felt. And she was doing really embarrassing things. She would sit out in the front of our house. We lived in a cul-de-sac in this little suburban development, in her pajamas all day long, smoking, talking to the neighbors, and my kids' friends, and they were mortified. And, it caused conflict between, my then husband and I, until I ended up having to send her back to Maine. We sent her to treatment, tried to clean her up. That didn't work. She left early. It was a nightmare. And not just for me or him or the kids, for my mom too. I moved her in with us on totally selfish motives because I didn't want to be uncomfortable, because I'm so afraid of suffering. I'm so afraid of discomfort, that I will hurt you in the process. Just trying to protect myself. And I don't even know that I'm doing it. I've since been able to make amends to her and everybody else for that. But when I finally saw what was driving that, it was shocking to me. I didn't realize how sick I had gotten, how asleep I had fallen in that area.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite stories.
Should I close with that, with my little story, my favorite story?
Yeah, you used to close with your favorite story.
Okay, I'll do it at the end. So if you want to cut it out, you can. But it's just, I think it's, so great for step 3, but also for this fear stuff, because so much of step 3 is me being self-reliant because I think I know best. I think I know what happiness looks like. I think I know what it takes to get there. I think I know how to make it happen on self-reliance. And I'm wrong all the time. So there's this little Chinese village, and in this village is this family, and it's made up of a man and a woman and their grown child, and they are the poorest people in the whole village. They have absolutely nothing except their tiny little house, this small plot of land, and one horse. And this horse is how they do all of their farm work. It's really their only real asset. And one day the horse runs away and they have nothing. And all of the villagers come flocking to their house and, expressing their condolences. And they're just saying, I am so sorry. This is horrible. This is the worst thing that could ever happen. And the husband says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And, the villagers, are so shocked, and they say, of course it's horrible. You have nothing now. Your horse is gone. This is terrible. And over again, he says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And a week goes by, and the horse returns with an entire herd of horses with it. And now they're the richest people in the entire village. And all of the villagers again flock to their house saying, oh my goodness, what great fortune. This is fantastic. And the man says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And they say, what do you mean? This is amazing. How could you say that? You have all of these horses. You can do anything you want now. And he says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And a week goes by, and the son is is training one of the new horses, and he falls off, and he has this horrible accident, and he's all crippled and broken, and he's in bed and he's in pain. And the villagers all come to the house to express their condolences once again. And they say, oh, your poor son, this is terrible. And the father says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And they say, what is wrong with you? Your son, he's in pain. He's in bed. He was hurt. Of course, this is horrible. And he says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And a week goes by, and the Chinese army comes to town and takes with them every young man of fighting age off to a battle which none would return from. And so the point of that is, I have no idea what is good, what is bad. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I just show up. I just keep doing the next thing and accepting it, saying, okay, God, let's see what you're going to do with this. It might look horrible, but it's going to be okay in the end. I just have to keep moving forward, keep trusting God, keep doing what he would have me do, keep showing up in a way with integrity, and it's going to be okay. So that's my story. It's gotten me through a lot of hard times. Trust me, it's just about that God reliance. And if I can make it that simple, my life and the people close to me's lives go a lot better. Super grateful to be here with you guys this morning.
Thank you. That was so good, like always. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
And the rest of you guys have a great day. See you later. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this From the Vault re-release of the Magdalen House podcast. Tune in every first and third Wednesday for a release from one of our 3 podcast series. To learn more about the Magdalen House and the services we offer, visit magdalenhouse.org or follow us on your favorite social media channels by searching for the Magdalen House.